Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? It's your boy, the Doc, and we are back with another Dynasty Headliner video. If you guys paid attention last week, I told you that we are starting a new series where I go through every single position and give you some sleepers, guys that I think that the community is sleeping on when it comes to Dynasty. And this week, we're talking all about the wide receivers. Let's jump into it. All right, so some things that you need to know when it comes to the wide receiver position. First off, let me just say that predicting wide receiver breakouts is not easy, but there are certain traits that we are looking for. First up, age matters. If you go back to some Dynasty wide receivers that I want you to buy this offseason, video I did about a month ago, I told you that 80% of wide receivers have their best season between the ages of 23 and 30. More specifically, though, 55% of wide receivers' best seasons occur between the ages of 25 and 29. So ideally, we'd like to get guys before they hit that age apex. The other thing we need to know is that, of course, situation matters when it comes to wide receivers breaking out and potentially having a lot of value. So quarterback quality isn't the only factor that applies here, but it's certainly the most important factor when it comes to predicting which guys are going to break out next year. Offensive scheme, target competition, and overall team talent are also things that play a huge role when it comes to producing wide receiver success year over year. So we have to consider that whole picture when it comes to their situation. Now, the other thing we need to know about the wide receiver position in particular is that you have to time the breakout. So when guys are being considered slept on, you have to time that up. And there is some data to suggest when wide receivers will bump up into that elite category. And we've always heard that year 3 is when that breakout occurs, but statistically, that is not actually true. Most of the data that I could find said that top 24 wide receivers tend to break out by year 3, not necessarily in year 3. And so that's a common misnomer that I think a lot of people make the mistake of targeting third-year wide receivers. The data doesn't suggest that it is in year 3. The data actually suggests that year 2 is when most elite wide receivers take their biggest jump. In fact, most receivers will take that jump in year 2. Since 2014, nearly 30% of wide receivers outperform their rookie numbers in all major categories. Another interesting data point that I was able to find is that over the last 15 years, sophomore wide receivers are almost twice as likely to outperform their ADP when compared to every other wide receiver group. So sophomore wide receivers are almost always the ones that we want to be targeting as potential sleeper candidates because they're the most likely to outperform their ADP. Again, the big changes in year 2, not year 3. So with all of those things in mind, here are my picks for the 3 best sleeper wide receivers that you need to be looking at in Dynasty. First guy we're going to be talking about today is Rome Odunze. Now, I'll be honest, I'm pretty surprised to see that Rome Odunze is still being drafted inside the top 20 wide receivers in Dynasty startups. I know that he was a first-round pick last year, but he had a pretty boring rookie season from a production standpoint. But again, this video is all about predicting sleepers, and a slightly disappointing 2024 could be setting up a monster 2025 for Rome Odunze. His lack of production wasn't entirely surprising, given the fact that he was sharing the field with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, and the fact that he was third on the depth chart among those guys. He actually ran the 13th most routes in the NFL among wide receivers last year, but he was 75th in target rate. So even though he was on the field a ton and running a ton of routes, he just wasn't commanding a very high target share. But the good news is Keenan Allen is probably going to be on a different team after free agency, and he should have a path to a larger opportunity share in the same offense that produced not 1 but 2 1,000-yard receivers with the Lions last year. Now, he did have some bright spots last season. He had 18 red zone targets, which was 10th among all wide receivers. He was also top 15 in air yards, ADOT, and deep targets. So there are opportunities for him. He just needs to capitalize on them. So if we combine that opportunity with what we hope is a simultaneous improvement in play for Caleb Williams, and the Bears offensive line, I think we can actually see Odunze manage to outpace his current ADP, despite it being higher than what I think it should be. All right, before we jump into the last two guys, I've got to tell you about our friends over at Turtle Beach. Now, Turtle Beach is really changing the game with their headphones. I have always been an avid video game player, and I've always used Turtle Beach headsets when I am playing those games. Now, I'm not a professional gamer by any stretch, so I care about things like comfort and quality, and that is what Turtle Beach is going to deliver. And the thing that I'm the most impressed with is their new Stealth 700 series. It's the industry's first ever cross-play dual wireless transmitter system. What does that mean? It means that you can seamlessly switch between your PC and your consoles with just the click of a button. No other headset can do that for you. And it gets even better. While they're being connected to one of those things, you can also connect them to your phone. So if somebody calls you, you can answer the phone call right there while you're playing your game. I love the cross-play ability so that I can play with just one set of headphones. It makes my life a lot easier in my day-to-day life when I'm sometimes playing on my PC and sometimes I'm playing on my PlayStation, and sometimes I just want to be able to listen to some tunes on my phone. But if you head over to turtlebeach.com, use the code HEADLINERS for 10% off your entire order. And they don't just have headphones, they've got gaming mice, keyboards. If you want a racing or flight simulator, they have those as well. Again, use the code HEADLINERS when you sign up and tell them that you got this information from the Fantasy Headliners. It helps us out and it helps you out. You get 10% off when you use that code HEADLINERS at checkout. The next sleeper wide receiver that we're going to be talking about today is Khalil Shakir. Now, when we're mentioning wide receivers that break out in their first 3 years, he's the type of player that we're looking at. He paced the Bills in targets, catches, and receiving yards, and he's tied to the league MVP at quarterback. So it's hard to get much better than that at the quarterback position, but his usage is actually kind of surprising from last season, given that he's outside the top 65 wide receivers in snap share, routes run, and route participation. So even though he was not used a lot in the offense, he still managed to be hyper efficient with the targets that he got. He was second in the league in yards after the catch, and he was 7th in target separation, averaging over 2 yards of separation by the time the ball actually got to him. He signed a brand new 4-year extension, so we know the team is invested heavily in his success, and they've got a lot of contracts coming up that they're going to have to pay out, and so they're going to make some decisions on the offensive side of the ball. So it's good to see that they've already locked up Shakir as one of their top options on offense, and they've already invested a top pick in Keon Coleman, but I think they operate in different areas of the field. Shakir's running out of the slot a ton, and he's used more in that short to intermediate route range where we see Josh Allen target players quite a bit. We saw that with Stephon Diggs. He became a target monster in part because of some of the usage that he had in the slot. So it's not unprecedented for Josh Allen to see success in that position and specifically give that player a ton of opportunities. So we see Khalil Shakir make that jump as kind of a target hog next year, and we're having a totally different conversation about him going forward in Dynasty. I don't think he's going to have a lot of target competition, and if anything, if that bump does come in his volume, he's going to have a great season for your fantasy team. He's already one of the most consistent players in the NFL in terms of scoring PPR points, but if he could just get a little bit more opportunity, a little bit more time on the field, he could jump into a totally different stratosphere of wide receiver. The only real question mark on his resume right now is the fact that he doesn't get a ton of opportunities in the red zone. Only 10 targets last season, which is outside the top 40 wide receivers in the league. But the good news is that he caught 9 of those targets. So even though he only converted 4 touchdowns on the year, there is some opportunity for him to jump up into that 8 to 10 touchdown range. If he can get 20 to 30 more targets and about 20 more catches, we're talking about maybe even a top 15 wide receiver that you don't have to break the bank on if you're drafting him in startups or trying to acquire him in a trade. If he can become a more consistent end zone threat, I think Khalil Shakir has a chance to really jump up in his value in Dynasty as soon as this season. The next guy up on this list is Jeudy. Now, I could make a case that Jeudy and Odunze should actually have their ADPs flipped in Dynasty right now. Jeudy's coming off his best season as a pro. He finished as the wide receiver 12 overall in PPR last year, and he had insane volume. He had the 7th most targets among wide receivers, the 4th highest snap share, and led the league in total routes run with 700 routes run. He was also top 12 in receptions, receiving yards, and led the league in total route wins. So he was running a ton of routes and also winning those routes against the corners that he was playing. Now, he did all this with arguably the worst quarterback situation in the league, or one of the worst quarterback situations in the league. And I'm convinced that the Browns are going to do something about that quarterback situation. They're going to either get somebody in free agency or the draft. It will not be Deshaun Watson next year, but it's actually just insane to me that I have to talk about Jeudy in a sleeper video, given what he accomplished last year at just 25 years old. You can't convince me that there are 33 wide receivers that have a better profile than what Jeudy does after last year. So while he's technically a sleeper based on his ADP and apparently the consensus public perception of him, I think we've already seen what his potential is. And this year, we're just going to see the market correct on him the way that they already should have. All right, guys, that's all I got for you this week. Hopefully you're enjoying this Dynasty content. If you are, let me know in the comments, who are some sleepers that you like at the wide receiver position this year? Who's going to break out? Who's going to really have a great season in 2025? I love having conversation with you guys down in the comments. And if you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton in the off season, especially. But that's all I got for you guys this week, and we will see you next time.
Analytics.